next talk, Becoming a Real Man, a story of success, hitting rock bottom, and redefining what it means to be a man. I'm looking forward to hearing this story. Please welcome a real man, Jason Bowers.
Thanks, everybody. So I've prepared some slides for you. There's 2 to be exact, and you'll have to wait about 15 minutes to see the next one. So I was going to give a traditional presentation, like the traditional TED style, where I had a bunch of slides and I memorized the whole thing and just kind of did it that way. And as I was putting this together, I realized it became very clear that this was a story. And I kept writing and writing and writing, and what I realized was that it's a story, and then it really needed to be read to maintain its essence. So I'm going to read you a story. So here goes. Men, all the men in the room, all the men in your lives, I'm here to tell you that most of what you were taught by your families, your peers, the media about what it means to be a man is wrong, and it's causing a lot of pain. I've titled my story Becoming a Real Man, but it's not a story about how to get laid more or how to succeed with your startup or how to biohack your body to get monster abs. This is a story about how to stop living your life according to an extremely limited and harmful definition of masculinity that really no one can succeed at. And how to start living as your fullest, most confident, and powerful self. I believe that the time has come for a huge change so that we don't have to waste our lives pursuing a definition of success that does not bring satisfaction or fulfillment and leaves so many feeling like failures who are pissed off or checked out or both. And to make my case, I'm going to tell you the story of my life, my childhood, how I lost my way, my sense of who I was, how I truly hit rock bottom, and rose from the ashes for the first time in my life. I got real about who I was, what I was feeling, what I really cared about, and what I really wanted. How I became a real man, and why you might want to do the same. So I was born in around 1980 in an LA suburb, and I'd say I was a pretty typical boy. I wanted to play and to have fun. I wanted to be loved and to feel safe. I wanted attention from my parents and to make them happy and proud. I wanted to be liked and accepted by the other kids, to fit in. In the end, I think childhood can be boiled down to a very simple truth. As kids, the things that we most want is acceptance, and the thing that we most fear is rejection. If you just take a moment to feel into that, think of a time when you might have been rejected or had that sense of feeling rejection. We don't tend to forget those moments easily, and we also tend to do whatever we can to avoid them. So as a boy, I learned, like most of us do, that in order to avoid rejection, I needed to adjust my behavior and my emotions in order to be a boy in the acceptable way. And here are the basics of what I learned. I learned not to cry or to be too emotional, because that's what babies and girls did. And being either one of those was a terrible and shameful thing for a boy. I learned not to need help because big boys figured it out and they did it themselves. I learned that dolls and dresses and anything pink were off limits and that liking them was really bad. This was very confusing and shameful to me because I did like a lot of those things. But I learned very quickly never to say so. So I learned to act tough, to fight, to be aggressive, because these were rewarded while weakness was shamed and ridiculed. So I learned to despise weakness and to shame it. I learned to be a bully in order to keep from being bullied. I learned that there was a rank, and that to get to the top you needed to be meaner, tougher, to attack first, or to try your best to be invisible. I learned that it was best to always know the answer, and quite embarrassing to ever be wrong. So I learned to take fewer risks. I learned that I constantly needed to be on the defensive, ready to prove that I was not weak, or a pussy, or a girl. I learned that while we were friends, I was engaged in a fierce competition with all of the other boys over pretty much everything, for some mysterious prize. And I was a good student, and I learned these lessons well. By the time I finished elementary school, things all looked pretty good on the outside. I was a good athlete, a good student. I'd had a couple of girlfriends. I'd even kissed one of them with tongue. My inner world was a completely different story. I didn't talk much. I was prone to anger and angry outbursts. I felt like I was always on the verge of tears, but I almost never cried. I felt very alone and very afraid, but I knew by then that it was important to look tough and cool, so that's the role that I played. On to junior high. One of the primary lessons of junior high that it was best to be one of the guys that all the girls liked. And the best way to do that was to be famous, like junior high style. And to be famous, you could be very good looking, but that didn't really always work. And you could be entertaining and funny. You could hang out with the cool kids, or you could be one of the toughest, or you could be one of the bad boys who really didn't give a shit about anything. Things like intelligence, honesty, and emotional sensitivity didn't tend to score you very many points, which I remember feeling very frustrated about because I really felt like they should. But they didn't, so I played by the rules. I started studying women's magazines to find out what it was that women really wanted in order to make myself desirable. And I tried to be whatever that article said I should be until I read the next one, which said I should be something else. You should have seen some of the crazy shit I was thinking about and trying. I learned that I needed to look like a tanned, shiny, smooth gladiator who was sensitive, sweet, caring, and also tough, firm, assertive, and a badass, which was a total mess. I learned to be witty and funny and meanly sarcastic. I learned from porn how big my penis was supposed to be and how women were supposed to react when it touched them, and later to feel pretty ashamed and confused when it didn't happen that way. I learned to throw myself into athletics and dreams of future fame and fortune in order to cope with the anxious and miserable reality that I was living in. And then on to high school. In high school, I had a girlfriend, and I focused on my athletic pursuits and my academics. And I did my best to stay out of any drama because none of it really made sense to me. I was actually very focused, and they were pretty good years. I started to develop a set of values around hard work and honesty and integrity and doing whatever it was I was told I had to do to get me out of the reality that I was in and safely and successfully into a future that sounded so appealing by contrast. So here was the plan. I'd work really hard at sports and school, get into a good college, get good grades while learning to binge drink, sleep with lots of hot women, then onto a great career making tons of money, becoming famous for something, having a big house, traveling, cool cars, a hot wife to prove what a man I was, and then a family of my own and a blissful ride into the sunset. And once I got there, I would feel good, right? And I think I definitely believed it, and I know that I always wanted to. So I did all of that. I did it all really well, and through most of it, I felt pretty clear about who I was and what I was all about, what life was all about. I had integrity, the work ethic, something like values, and I had drive. I was competing, just as I had been taught, and I was going to win. I was sure of that. I felt sure of that. And through it all, there was this sense that something about it just wasn't right. It just didn't all add up, like there was something that I was chasing that was impossible to catch. And I think in college, I began to see through the veil, and I started to lose some of what had made me who I was. I stopped being quite as honest. I started losing my integrity, started drinking more and more and not being as kind to women and my peers. And the pain, I think, was catching up with me. It was eating at me, and I began to see that maybe the dream I had been sold and bought was not going to be the magic pill I had once hoped it would be. But I kept pushing forward. I graduated, I got a great job, I started moving up the ranks, making more and more money, was in a long-term relationship with the one, I was making great friends, and at the same time feeling more and more like something was missing, like there was some hole to fill or some part of myself or my life that just wasn't yet in place. But I kept pushing on, and I kept feeling more and more disillusioned. In 2010, I was 30 years old. I was engaged to be married to a beautiful woman. I was in a leadership role at a great Silicon Valley startup. I had awesome friends, and we went to cool festivals, and I had this great motorcycle. I had most of the things that I had believed would make me feel happy, and I was well on my way to the rest. But more and more, I kept feeling that something wasn't right. There was something I knew at a deep level, but could never put into words. And I remember that this question started entering my mind. Is this really it? Is this the whole thing? Is this all that life is about? And I knew that the answer was no, but I didn't know what to do about it, and it started to eat away at me. And I didn't know it at the time, but a major turning point had occurred. I had succeeded, according to the definition that I had held. I had succeeded at this false game. The game I'd been playing was one that was based on fear and scarcity and competition and a very limited definition of what it meant to be a happy, successful man. And succeeding brought no real joy or fulfillment. I kept waiting for my work to fulfill me, for my relationship to my partner to fulfill me, but there is no job or other person that can fill the human desire for love and connection and intimacy and authenticity and full creative expression when the heart feels too afraid to fully give or receive those things. And I think that men have been learning this lesson for generations. As I began to understand that the very things I had defined myself by, that had made me who I was, were not going to fill the dissatisfaction inside of me, they began to matter less and less. Things started to unravel. I started coasting at work, missing meetings, hiding behind past performance. Happy hours seemed to get longer and longer and more frequent. I was living from weekend to weekend, chasing the feeling of connection I had when I was drunk or I was high, always chasing something outside of myself. After years of that, I became truly disillusioned. I'd completely lost my sense of integrity, lost my drive, my purpose. I'd lost trust and self-respect. I'd absolutely lost my sense of who I was. I'd seen through the game and realized that who I'd become and what I did to succeed was never really me. So here I was at this point, I was 34 years old. I wasn't sleeping well. I felt sexually insecure and found myself watching porn instead of making love to my wife, zoning out in the TV every night, drinking more, escaping more. I was out of shape, distracting myself in so many ways to the reality of my life, which is that I was angry and frustrated and lonely and at a loss. I didn't really know how to love or to feel or to connect. I was ashamed to cry. I was defensive. I was highly competitive. I refused to let others help me or to even appear that I needed help. And I did need help. I just didn't know what with. And it could have kept going on this way. I'm sure that I could still be there, but I was lucky. My ex-wife convinced me to see a couples therapist, and there, an older, wiser man asked me a question that changed my life. He said, if this was it for the rest of your life, would you be okay with that? And there's this long pause, and he said, because now's the time to decide, pal. He was kind of a jackass, but he was an awesome therapist. And I knew immediately that the answer to that question was no. I wasn't okay with that. So I began to get real, to get true. And with the help of so many people, I began to question the beliefs and stories that had contributed to who I had become. As I saw the falseness of them and what they were costing me, I was able to begin to release and rewrite them. I had believed that feeling and sharing my emotions was dangerous, that it made me weak and would lead to rejection. But really, sharing them made me stronger, and it allowed for so much relief and opened up connection and intimacy like I'd never known before and had always been searching for. I had believed that I needed to do it alone, because that's what men did, and that needing or asking for help made me weak. Really, Opening myself up to receiving the gifts of support from others took so much more courage than doing it myself, and it made life so much richer. I knew that the things I was ashamed of would have to go with me to the grave as secrets, but the truth was, as I shared them with those that I loved, I was not rejected, and I was free of the weight of them. I had learned to fear and be ashamed of the feminine in me. Really, by learning to love the softer side of myself, I was able to truly open my heart to loving myself and to fully loving women. Balance made me more of a complete man than I had ever been. I had desperately clung to the dream that financial success and the rest of the fairy tale would be the answer. But in reality, none of it meant a damn thing when I couldn't really share it open-heartedly with anyone. I think if you ask most financially successful 50-year-old men what really matters, they'll probably tell you they're not sure anymore. They'd once known, but maybe they're not sure anymore. I think if you ask him again 20 years later, I'd be willing to bet, unless he's one of the ones who's given up on life, he'll tell you it's the relationships that matter the most. We've all heard this story before, right? We've all heard this. For some reason, we choose to ignore it. We don't have to wait until the end to really start living. We don't have to compete for rank and title. We don't have to be right all the time. We don't all have to be American Gladiator CEO entrepreneurs. We don't have to feel ashamed for being less than what the commercials tell us we should be, or for the mistakes that we've made in the past. We don't have to prove our manhood with trophy wives or cars or houses. In fact, I'm sure that no man ever really has. What we can do is we can learn to open our hearts, because it really is all about love. It really is all about the relationships. We can learn to be our authentic selves, to be completely honest with the people we love. And I say that, I mean completely honest. We can express ourselves in every way we desire. We can be soft, and we can be firm and assertive, and we can stand up for what we believe in. And when you get real and true with who you are and what matters to you at the deepest level, and you live your life from that place, you will feel clarity, and you will feel energized and an unshakable confidence in the truth of your life. And I believe that we owe it to ourselves, to the people that we love, and to the boys that will follow in our footsteps. We can change this by simply changing our own lives. That's it.